Time for our weekly appearance from Overdrive's Bryan Hayes. It's Harvey's Hot Takes. Bryan, as you know, the Leafs may have lost a couple of more key pieces of their blue line. We also know they spent a lot of prospect capital and a lot of draft capital at last year's deadline. They don't have a ton to offer other teams. So what options do you think GM Brad Treliving has to improve this roster ahead of the deadline?
I don't think he's got very good options at all, Jay. I think the reality is, what he could do is overpay and be in a position where he's got no leverage and make a bad trade. But he should not do that. He better not do that. And that's certainly not in the better interest of the Maple Leafs, whether it's today or certainly into the future. Because like you said, they have traded away a lot of picks, a lot of prospects. They don't have much of a farm system here. But furthermore, we got to consider the team that they have right now. I mean, this team is currently on the outside of the playoffs looking in. They've played their way into that. It's no longer 10, 15 games in. They've played 50-plus games already. They have determined who they are. I think it's on this team to build and dig themselves out of this rut and get themselves into the playoffs. And it's not like it's miles away from them. They're just on the outside looking in. But I don't think this team has done enough this year to warrant the GM going all in and making some drastic move that's going to hurt them in the future to save them today. And furthermore, I think if you look into the past, they also don't deserve that. They are not worthy of their GM sticking his neck out based on some championship pedigree in the past, which clearly doesn't exist in Toronto. I'll give you an example where it does exist. In Florida, the Florida Panthers are in even worse shape than the Maple Leafs this year based on wins and losses. But I can understand why Bill Zito, their GM, might say, I'm going to find a way to improve this team. Seth Jones is hurt. Barkov's been out all year. I'm going to trade picks and prospects to help this team because of what they've proven to me in the past. They deserve that. The Maple Leafs don't. Their core don't deserve it because they haven't been winners in the past. They haven't won enough games this year. So ultimately, if I'm Brad Treliving, I'm hoping you get healthy, and I'm banking on great goaltending. I'm banking on Austin Matthews continuing to play at the level he's playing at and trying to drag this team into the playoffs. And really, it's about the next 7 games, Jay. You got to get to the Olympic break. They have 7 games between now and the Olympic break. They've got to survive them. You've got to accumulate points to stay in the race. But I don't think this team has done anything that would warrant, Brad Treliving doing anything crazy or even anything moderately crazy to try to help them right now. Whoever's in that room, whether they're healthy or not, you play, you pick up points, get to the Olympic break, reset, and then we can chat once you come back from the Olympic break.
Okay, Bryan, on Wednesday we saw Bo Bichette officially introduced as a member of the New York Mets. We know the Mets will be in Toronto the week of Canada Day. We also know that Mitchell Marner will finally make his return to Toronto as a member of the Las Vegas Golden Knights on Friday. It's a two-parter for you, my friend. How would you compare the two players' legacies in Toronto and how they'll be viewed? And how do you expect they'll be received when they actually make their respective returns?
I think their legacies are actually very similar. I'll start there. I think their legacies are very similar. They were the number 2 guy, in a 1-2 combo, right? With Bo Bichette, it was Vladdy and Bo. But Vladdy Guerrero Jr. was the man. He was the hyped player. He was the guy when he was coming up through the system. He was getting all the love. And then there was a little bit of love for Bo Bichette. Obviously, people were prepared for Bo to arrive and were certainly excited for that. But there was always, in that duo, a Batman and a Robin. And Vladdy was Batman and Bo Bichette was Robin. The same thing with the Leafs. Austin Matthews was Batman, Mitch Marner was Robin. So in terms of their legacies, they were always the number 2 guy in Toronto. Doesn't mean they weren't great players. Doesn't mean they weren't homegrown and beloved players by the fan base. They certainly were. But I think they were always in the shadow of the one guy who loomed a little bit larger. And again, that was Vladdy for the Jays and Matthews for the Maple Leafs. But both really good players. Both guys that had ups and downs throughout their careers at different moments. But I think in terms of how they'll be received, it will be very, very different in my opinion because of the way they went out, but also where they're from and the team they played for within the city. And what I mean by that is Mitch Marner being from Toronto, people in a way held that against him, the way he went through his contract negotiation, the fact that he wanted to leave How could you want to leave your hometown, even though a lot of people in his hometown wanted him out? You know, it's a weird psychology with fandom. Bo Bichette's not from Toronto. He's not born and raised in Toronto. His dad was a big league player. He never played for the Blue Jays. You know, it was an understanding that this was more of a business deal, where Marner was living out a fantasy of a lot of people in Toronto. So that was always a different approach. And again, I mentioned the contract. Marner had a very acrimonious contract negotiation. Bichette never had that. In fact, Bichette actually signed a longer-term deal to avoid arbitration altogether, so there wouldn't be any dust-ups. But I also think the psychology of the fan bases are very different. Maple Leaf fans are much more angry. You know, there's a deeper cut to being a Maple Leaf fan because they haven't won in so long. You know, they haven't even been to a Cup final in so long. And again, I think Leaf fans are just a little bit more bitter. They're a little bit more jaded. You know, they're a little bit more angry with their own team. There's more self-loathing, you know, as a Leaf fan. And that applies to Mitch Marner because when he was here, he didn't get the job done. He wasn't clutch enough. He demanded the most money he could get, and yet he didn't show up when they needed him the most. Where with Bichette and the Blue Jays, they went to the ALCS in 15 and 16. They won World Series, multiple World Series in my lifetime, you know, just over 30 years ago. They were just in the World Series, and Bo Bichette, you know, hit a massive home run in Game 7 and came back and battled back and played in the World Series, even though he wasn't there in the first 2 rounds. So I think the psychology of both fan bases are very different, and I think that will apply to how these two players will be received. Where Marner, it's going to be vitriol, it's going to be loud, it's going to be nasty, and it's going to take a long time for those wounds to heal. I think with Bichette, it's going to be closer to a celebration, closer to an understanding of why he left or why maybe he didn't feel as connected to the city. And ultimately, you know, he's making $42 million a year in New York. Like, that's such a massive amount of money. I think every Blue Jay fan can understand, okay, we can get behind that. To finish this point, Marner's making $12 million a year in Vegas. I don't think there's a Leaf fan around that believes he would have accepted that number. He would have demanded more if he was in Toronto. So again, one last thing that Leaf fans hold against Marner, where when it comes to Bichette and his dollar amount, I think people say, I understand where you're coming from.
Bryan, we're down to the Final Four in the National Football League, and yet Terry Pegula, owner of the Buffalo Bills, is the guy who stole all the headlines this week for the wrong reasons. We know the Bills need a head coach. They've got some holes on defense. They've definitely got some holes at wide receiver. But Josh Allen's still arguably the best player in the entire National Football League, even though he hasn't been great in the postseason. So how concerned should Buffalo Bills fans be, Bryan? How concerned should the Mafia be about how things stand today?
Well, I think what, you know, Bills Mafia needs to recognize, and I'm sure they all are recognizing, is that the window's closing on, you know, the greatness of Josh Allen. You know, and there's a Josh Allen question that needs to be answered. Forget who the coach is going to be. Forget what the defense is going to look like. Forget who the owner is and what these press conferences are all about. Is Josh Allen clutch in the biggest moments? I think it's a legitimate question after what we saw last weekend because, you know, that's what I detailed on this show last week. I thought the Bills would win because I thought that defense, the special teams, the players around Josh Allen, the 52 other players on the roster, his former coach now Sean McDermott, all the coordinators, would put the ball in his hand with a chance to win. And they did that multiple times. They did that on multiple fronts, in regulation and in overtime. And Josh Allen did not get the job done. Clear cut. He did not get the job done. That's on Josh Allen. So I think Mahomes would have got the job done. I think Tom Brady would have got the job done. He didn't get the job done. So I think that question now all of a sudden looms. Can he be clutch in the biggest moments? Because that was in the divisional round. That wasn't the championship round. That wasn't the Super Bowl. He's got to go another 2 ticks before he even gets to the Super Bowl and makes those big plays in the big moments. So all of a sudden there's a Josh Allen question. There's also a reality that the way he plays, with how big he is and how much contact he takes and how much he wants to take on, the window is shorter for him, in my opinion, than other great quarterbacks like a Tom Brady. Brady sat in the pocket, could play till he was 45. I don't think that's a reality with Allen. I think who they get next as their head coach has got to be the right guy because the window, we're talking 3 to 5 years here, maybe 6 years. And I think you got to find the right guy to come in, make sure you build an offense around him that maybe takes a little bit of the load off, Make sure you build up this defense. Like you said, that's on Brandon Beane and I guess Terry Bagula to factor in as well. And do whatever you can to take advantage of a guy who is immensely talented and is going to get you to the playoffs every year. Having Allen gets you, I think, 10 wins in the regular season every year. What you can do beyond that is up to the next coach, is up to Beane and what they can build around it. But I think Mahomes is coming back, right? I think Lamar and Burrow are eventually going to get there, and they're going to be fighting in the playoffs. New England's not going anywhere. Drake May's for real. Vrabel's for real. That defense is for real. So you have, teams in your own division, quarterbacks in your own division, other guys in your own conference that are going to come alive. This was their year. And, they got to get the coach right. They got to make sure Allen's in the right position to be clutch the next time he gets there because, again, the window's closing. It's still a great job to have. It's still a really good team. But this was their chance, Jay. I hope for Bills Mafia they don't look back on this 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now and say that was the opportunity for Josh Allen and the Bills to get their Super Bowl ring.
Brian, before we let you go, why don't you reach behind you, grab that quiz belt, and show it off to us? Because I saw when you awarded it that Mr. James Duthie handed it to you upside down, and I thought he did you dirty. So we're going to let you. There you go. Now that quiz belt is right side up. That's what we do on this show. We make sure we rectify the problems of other shows. Thanks, Bryan Hayes. This has been Harvey's Hot Takes.
Hot Takes is presented by Harvey's. Harvey's 2 for $8 event is back. Enjoy 2 original or veggie flame grill burgers topped just the way you like. Harvey's, it's a beautiful thing.